All right, guys, so we're going to talk today again about bulletproof engine combinations. And I've kind of talked about bulletproofing in VWs, and we're going to show this 36 horse real quick because, you know, this engine's pretty bulletproof because it just doesn't have enough power to hurt anything. So, you got, and the reason I'm showing this is basically the technology back in 1938, 37, when they were doing the design for Volkswagen, was basically the similar to the same design we have today. They've just tweaked it and tweaked it and tweaked it, never really changed it much. So really we're talking about 1930s technology that we're using up to 2003, I think, is when the last Volkswagen was in production. Correct me if I'm wrong. Comments, please. And but we're going to talk about what's changed and what's really bulletproof today. And a lot of people go, oh, I only use German parts because German parts are bulletproof and they're better than the Chinese or Brazilian. You know, there's going to be a time pretty soon when there is no more German parts, and we're almost there right now. I mean, even the ones that say that they're German, like the points, a lot of the stuff like that, you know, from Bosch, a lot of the parts still are they're made in China, just reboxed, and I that's what I believe. I don't really know that for sure, but it just looks like it to me. It doesn't look like the same German parts that I used to use years ago. So, you know, the German guys are all, the German parts people are always saying, you know, we got to use German. German's the only thing I ever put in my car, blah, 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 whatever. But I'm going to talk to you about what, in my opinion, is bulletproof today, and what engine combinations work and are in that bulletproof zone, which is a very loose term. Like I said, we're talking about 1937, 38 technology. And, you know, we're talking about technology that was designed for a 25 horsepower engine that's evolved into some guy's 600 horsepower or whatever. So anyway, it's a very loose term. But anyway, let's talk about this. So the 36 horsepower, bulletproof? Yeah, that is a bulletproof engine. Even with the Okrasa setup, you can go to a 69 millimeter crank, and you can go to the big bore kit. I think you're still in the bulletproof zone. You can go to the Okrasa dual port heads. I think you're still in the bulletproof zone. Pretty strong combination, but really, 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 really expensive to basically make the power of a 1776 or at the most, you know. The wonderful 40 horse. Again, I still haven't changed my fuel filter, I know. But the 40 horse engine, I would say pretty much bulletproof. You can still be, you're kind of pushing it. You do too much with the 40 horse, and the crankshaft isn't that strong on these. You start doing too much to it and you drive it like hell, you could be risking breaking the crankshaft. But you know, you can even do a 1385 on one of these that's still kind of in the bulletproof zone. You almost have to make it have enough power to drive in today's roads. And you know, you could even put a small cam in it. That's about as max, I would say. You're just barely in the bulletproof zone, but possibly if you don't drive it too hard, you'll still be bulletproof. The good old 16 single port. Yep, they're pretty darn bulletproof. I would say probably a little bit more bulletproof than the 16 dual port. There's a dual port head over here. You guys that don't know. The 16 single, because of the pure design, and the reason I say it's a little bit more bulletproof than the 16 dual port is because the intake manifold design is strong. It doesn't have, you have less problems with the boots leaking. Those are problems that you have probably with your 1600 sometimes. The boots right here can start leaking vacuum. That's why on that, you know, you want the German ones, of course, if you can get them. But the 16 single is actually a really good design. I believe, if I recall correctly, the heads have less problems with crackage than the 16 dual ports. So I'm going to say that the 16 single is probably the most bulletproof Volkswagen engine until you get into some of the other things that you can do. I mean, that's pretty much I mean, that's pretty much most bulletproof. But, you know, of course, we all want more power than that, right? So all of us are going to go with 16 dual port or larger engine. Let's talk about those now. So the question is always, how big can I go before I'm out of the bulletproof zone? Well, there's a lot of opinions on this. This is all, again, my opinion. You can go with it, not go with it. It's all up to you. But this is where I kind of draw the line, is I don't like to see much larger than 90.5 opening out of your case with a mag case. Even with the aluminum, I'm still kind of on the fence going larger than that. Because what happens is when you go larger than a 90.5 opening, for the cylinder of a 90.5 cylinder, I don't know the exact opening of the, I'm not a machinist, so I don't know the exact opening size of that. Somebody can always comment that below. That'd be great if you're a machinist. But what happens is if you go larger than that for the 94 cylinders, you end up with the case, you end up with usually having the case saver wearing through on the hull. So you end up seeing that part of the case saver there. To me, that is not bulletproof. That's like scary, you know, but it does work. I mean, guys do it all the time. I mean, it's done on the track many times. I'm not going to say that that is bulletproof. Okay. And what happens is if you're running 10mm studs, like these larger studs that are in this one, and you have your 94 cylinder in there, basically these studs are becoming part of your cooling system because they're rubbing against your cylinder so tightly that it's such a tight fit with the 10mm studs. And if you go with 8mm, it's kind of like, you know, not strong enough, so you kind of run into weird things at that point. So your 10mm studs are stronger, so I always like to see 10mm studs. But what happens is that cylinder's too close to there, and to me that's a heat transfer point, and that's not bulletproof. So I'm not real big on the 94s, never have been. A lot of us are the same way on that. Some guys aren't, but I would say 90.5 bulletproof. 92 thick wall is also in the bulletproof zone. Now, the problem with the thick wall is you run into the same thing. You end up with this being part of your cooling system, basically, because you're really tight here. And how that works out is you have the 90.5 openings here. Then on your heads, you have this part. This head's not so clean, but it's actually still a good head. You have this part opened up here for the 94 cylinder, and you have a thicker wall cylinder. So you have the case side is 90.5. This is a 94 here, and you have a thicker wall cylinder that's a 92, and that to me is still in the bulletproof zone. So you can go 92. The best one I always say is 90.5, but you can actually go to a 92 if you want and go thick wall and still be semi in the bulletproof zone. Crankshafts, let's talk about that a little bit. All right, the stock crankshaft 1600 is a very strong crankshaft. The weak point is that it doesn't have counterweights on the crankshaft, and so guys can weld on the crankshaft counterweights. You can get one of those welded cranks. I think you can still buy them VW stamped German steel. But, you know, I think that those are going to be going away. I don't know. You know, that might be the future. It looks that way. So what I do is I go with the Chinese. And, oh, my God, Chinese. Mike, you use Chinese? Yeah, of course. I mean, you guys all have cell phones, right? You're probably watching this on your cell phone. Guess what? Disappointment. Made in China. Okay. Not everything made in China is bad. It just means it's just about how it's made. Some of the steel items are not made as well, and it has to be pretty well managed. I believe the crankshafts that they have made with the 4340 chromoly are pretty well made. Do not get I would not recommend getting the cast crank any size, so I just wouldn't go there. But the 4340 chromoly are pretty strong, in my opinion. And I think that they're compatible with the Volkswagen crank, and you get a counterweighted crank. So I say that the 43, my opinion is the 4340 chromoly crank is in the bulletproof zone. So up to a 78, larger than that, you run into reciprocating weight problems, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the 4340 chromoly is actually, I think, a pretty good crankshaft. The stock crankshaft, if you don't worry about the counterweights, is pretty good. When you start going to performance, I would always recommend going 8 dowel on the crank, because these are only 4. The stock's only 4 dowel. Go 8 dowel on the crank. You learn that lesson. I learned that lesson many years ago when the crank started to wobble on me. So it happens. So anyway, stock is really good. This German steel is really good if you can still get them. You know, if you can't, the 4340 is really good, and you can still be in that bulletproof zone and have a stroker engine. I believe up to 78. Anything much bigger than that, you're kind of running into the out of the bulletproof zone. And then there's some rules I say on the 78. You know, aluminum case I think is a good idea on the 78 to still be bulletproof. Mag case, if you do that, you need to do something called shuffle pins minimum for it to be bulletproof. If you don't, even at that, like I said, the mag cases flex a lot more than aluminum does. Aluminum is more rigid. It's just a stronger material. It's not stronger per weight, but it's actually stronger altogether. So again, that's my opinion, and I think it's just a better case for a bulletproof build. I have a friend who has a 1776 with 150,000 miles on it, pulls the trailer all the time with it, and with a aluminum case. He's got 150,000 miles on it. It does not need to be rebuilt, and he's his daily driver, drives it all the time. It does not sound to me like it needs to be rebuilt. It's very, very strong running, and he has AA pistons. So guys that say that those don't work, busted. So anyway, let's talk about another one here. Coming up, we're going to be doing hopefully, we're going to be doing, if we have good enough parts, we're going to do a 74 stroker. We call it a drop-in stroker. It's going to be, you buy a stroker crank, 74, you get the clearance rods. They're very cheap. You know, I think Carcraft are $1.25 for a set of the chromoly stroker rods, and we'll get into rod lengths and stuff like that later when we do that. But you can build a nice little stroker motor. If you have a 1600 and you don't have resources to get machine work done, and your line bore's good, or you're guessing that your line bore's good, you may not be able to actually send it somewhere to have it done, checked. We'll kind of give you like a benchmark way to just, you know, backyard check that later on. Stay tuned, come back to the channel. It's not a foolproof way, but at least it's, you know, if you have no resources, you have no resources. That's just all there is to it. So we'll show you a little bit about how to check that later on. But anyway, 74 stroker in stock case, I think is still in the bulletproof zone. So you can do a 74 by 90.5. What size is that? 1904, I think. 1904. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. 1904 is still in the bulletproof zone. 74 by 92 thick wall, bulletproof in my opinion. Anything bigger than that, on a mag case, you're kind of pushing the limits of the magnesium. Let's talk about that for a minute. And by the way, I'm not saying that you can't build an engine larger than that. I'm just saying that it's kind of runs into that not such a bulletproof zone. And you know, I'm talking about bulletproof being strong, long-lasting engine. You know, not one that you rebuild every 25,000 miles or 15,000 miles or something like that. So anyway, what happens is you have two cylinders going opposite of each other. Hopefully you guys can see that. See my hands? You got two cylinders going opposite this way, two cylinders going opposite this way. The case is actually doing this, and you can't see it. It's moving back and forth. Shuffle pins help resist the case from doing that. Now, magnesium, being the type of material that it is, likes to flex, and will still, even with shuffle pins, get a little bit of movement in there, which causes wear to your line bore. So all those things are all engineering things that I've learned over the years that happen to your engine. So it causes wear to your line bore. line bore wears out on a mag case a lot faster than it does on an aluminum case. So that's why I like to see aluminum with the larger engine, because you have more weight, more reciprocating weight going like this as you get larger with your engine, you know, going across from each other, and that constant movement causes movement between the case halves and causes wear. So that's why I said there's limits to bulletproof. When you start to get into those other bigger engines, you know, 2332 and all that stuff, then you start to get more weight moving around. The case moves a lot more. To stay, not stay in the bulletproof film, but to make the engine last a little bit longer, I always recommend going to an aluminum case, because it does less of that, because it doesn't flex as much as the aluminum does, as the mag. So the aluminum doesn't flex as much. So anyway, let's talk more about what is potentially bulletproof as well. So they have the new Autolinea, or not new, they've been around a long time, I guess, Autolinea aluminum cases. Back years ago, all they had was scat aluminum, and scat cases were really good, so they are still, of course, today. And they were basically the only bubble top that I remember back in the old days. Maybe there were some others, because none of us really bought them because they were so damn expensive. I remember them being $1,000, and for us, you know, a mag case was $75. Aluminum's $1,000. It doesn't take long to figure out that I could go through 3 or 4 mag cases and not worry about it, and or 10. You know, I don't know, 10 mag cases. Is that right? 10 mag cases? Am I right on that? 10 mag cases before you go through one aluminum. So a lot of guys weren't buying them unless they were going huge motors and they were doing some kind of racing or something like that. And a lot of people back in the old days didn't go stroker, because a stroker crank was about the same price as they are today. And back then, you could build a whole engine for $300, and you could buy a stroker for $300. So, or if you bought an Okrasa, then they were like $1,000. So, and the same thing is today. There are crankshafts that are available that are quote unquote bulletproof that are $3,000. We're not going to talk about those, because those to me aren't affordable. That's more of a track guy. That's a guy going to the races. We're not talking about street bulletproof type stuff. So the thing about the aluminum case is it comes already with shuffle pins. Okay, so it's stronger. It's a stronger material. It's heavier, of course. You lose a little bit there. You do lose weight transfer, or heat transfer. The heat does not transfer out of the case as easily, so running a secondary oil cooler is necessary. It already comes drilled for the second oil cooler, so you have that benefit. It's already drilled. The case is already ready for a full flow double oil cooler system, and so it's all the stuff you would normally be paying for to have done on your other case. By the time you stack up all the machine work, you're almost there. You might as well just, you know, bite the bullet and buy the aluminum one. So it's but it's also a stronger material. They're already shuffle pins, so it doesn't, and it's a better material because it doesn't move or flex as much. That's why they use them in Type 4s. A lot of the Porsche engines are made out of aluminum. Some of them aren't, and I believe that Porsche went from aluminum to magnesium because of weight, because they were trying to, you know, put less weight in the back of the car for handling reasons. I don't think it was because of strength ever. I think it was more of that sort of thing that they were doing in those. So the top of the line for me is to go aluminum and go a 78, okay, 78 millimeter crank, and then you can, or 78 and a half. That's usually what they are. 78, some people, oh, this is 78 or 78 and a half. I mean, to me, it's like, you know, okay, most of the time when you say 78, it's 78.5. But 78 by 90 and a half or 78 by 92 thick wall, still in the bulletproof zone. Some other things that I like to see on the bulletproof today, or that are available, are the AA heads. To me, the AA heads are so much better than a lot of the other ones, and if I had one here, I already put it on the engine. That's why I try to do a lot of those videos on the AA heads. It's on the 1600 power up video. If you want to go back to that, you can check it out. I'll show you real quick what's the difference. AA Performance has a 4035 head, and so it has big valves in it. They have them available with high rev, single high rev, dual high rev springs. I would stay away from the dual high rev unless you're going to do a lot of work to your valve train, or you're going to be revving some serious RPMs or racing or something like that. Single high rev springs are usually enough. I think that's still in the bulletproof zone. If you go to the dual high rev, that's kind of running out of the bulletproof zone to me. You're kind of defeating the purpose of being strong. Not saying that you can't do that if you are going there. What they do on theirs is in these port vanes here for the air, they have it. They're really well opened up. You should always check that anyway with any heads you put on, because some of the replacement heads today have restrictions in the air ports. So look through those air ports and make sure that they're all opened up and they're not halfway casted shut. And to make sure that your engine is going to be bulletproof. That's another thing to look at. You guys are trying to build your own engine somewhere else in the world. Always make sure it has this on your heads. And if you're running something, especially if you're running something larger, I always recommend myself for my own engines. I use Cool Tin. A lot of guys will tell you that doesn't work. I've seen so many posts on it. We read the stuff back in the 80s that was written back then and actually tested it back in the old days, and we got cooler results. I don't remember the numbers on it. It was just something we just tested. We went, holy crap, these things in my opinion work. We're going to start running them on our performance engines. And the reason we run them the performance engines is a lot of times you don't always, if you have like the other exhaust, like you have the merged system exhaust, you can't run all the tin underneath the cylinders, so that kind of replaces that and keeps those big giant air gaps from being there. They do also make some aftermarket pieces that you can buy for the stock deflectors that go on the bottom of the cylinders. So keep that in mind. You can do that as well. If you don't like Cool Tin, if you don't want to try that, that's okay. It's up to you. But anyway, make sure the air vanes are clear. The reason I like the big valves, because more air is going through the heads, better flow. The AA Performance, I'm not saying to get the stock ones. I'm saying, you know what, they're about, I think they're less than $200 a piece. I was just looking, I think they're like $189 with 4035 valves and $189 I believe at CarCraft right now. So that's 4035 valves, big valves. I believe they have the stainless steel exhaust valve as well. And it has the single high rev springs, and the ports are all opened up. The air ports all through here are all opened up. The air vanes are opened up, and on top of that, the spark plugs, instead of having that much meat, have the longer spark plugs that have more meat around them, and they're located just slightly different. They're moved a little bit over. Here they have a better combustion chamber. Those heads I think are in. I think if I was going to go bulletproof, I would go those. If I was looking for the strongest and best stuff there is today available that you can buy on the shelf. I'm not talking about old stuff that used to be on the shelf, that used to be there. This is not good old times. We're talking about today, what's available. There was stuff back in the 80s that was way better than there is now. So, I think back then, I still haven't been able to get my research right, but back then we had real forged pistons, and today they're this, the Mahle makes the SEMA was a company that they bought, in 79 or something like that, and that Mahle bought in 79. SEMA used to sell the pistons, SEMA and NPR used to sell the pistons we used to use. And I believe the forge was real forged, because I remember we used to open up you could open up a brand new set of 90.5s, and you could get the ones that were the German ones. They had the Klobenschmidt, and they had the SEMA, and you could open them up, and you look at both of them, and the cast on them didn't have that brilliant shine. And then you'd open up the 90.5s, which were all forged at that time, and you could see they were just like shiny, this different kind of aluminum. So I don't know, there's been a lot of stuff on the soundbites, was reading about that, that they said that it was not real forged or whatever back then. Even I don't know if it was back then. To me, from just looking at them back then, I think that the pistons back then were real forged. Where they, at some point, I think Molle changed, because they bought out SEMA, and they started to probably do some changes to the company and started making, these pistons that they make today, which I don't normally buy because I think they're overpriced. If I'm going to spend that much money, I'm going to get either Wiseco or JE. I'm going to get a real forged piston. But anyway, that's just the way I look at it. I like Wiseco. I'm a motorcycle guy. Wiseco's been the go-to for many, many years for motorcycle pistons. Never had failures with their pistons, and that's why I go with those if I was going to build race engines. I don't think for the street, I think AA is fine as far as being bulletproof, as long as you're not revving it up super high RPMs and you're just driving it normally. Like I said, a friend of mine's got 150,000 miles on his engine, aluminum case, AA pistons. Okay, all right. So anyway, those are some of the bulletproof benchmarks I would go with, and I'll let you guys figure it out from there. If you have any questions, comments, please comment on the video. It really helps to get the video to be found. I'll talk to you on the next one, and we'll be taking apart this engine here later today.